Thank you, Professor Chakraborty, for agreeing to be a part of this budget talk. And for the students and the listeners, the audience, I have already interacted with you and gave a, I have mentioned about her. But since it's a formal platform, let me formally introduce Professor Lekha Chakraborty. She is a professor at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, as you know, and everything is already written there. But one thing that I must say while introducing her this platform, you know, let's say 20 years from now, if some economic history and writes the history of gender budget in the country or globally, I think Professor Lekha Chakraborty will have one chapter in that. I mean, that's all I can say in a nutshell about her. So she's the one, the authority, the pioneer in gender budgeting in the country, and she's very much noted economist, public finance expert globally as well. So rest as a student of economics, you can assume the rest about her caliber uh, and the kind of profile she has. So thank you, Professor Lekha, to agreeing for this particular talk. And without any further delay, I will request you to address the students. And students, please listen and ask the right questions, whatever is in your mind. You won't get this opportunity again, maybe in future, but not in the recent future. So thanks, Professor Chakraborty, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's very special because it's Deblal who has called me for this event. And thank you so much, Sanya, for communicating with me. And we could, make it possible. And I hope that you and your friends will talk to me and we can make the session very interactive. And my talk today is on the basis of my book. It's written by me in 2022. It's published by Palgrave Macmillan. The title of the book is Fiscal Policy for Sustainable Development in Asia Pacific, and it's with a special reference to gender budgeting in India. Debu, am I clear? My voice
Yes,
is okay?
you are very much clear.
Okay, okay. Because I can hear some disturbance here, like any other, uh,
No, all
you
others,
know,
everybody is mute.
muted.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, okay. I maybe my own echo. Okay, so maybe Debu, you can make it possible that this book can be a part of your library and
Sure, sure.
yeah, yeah,
We'll have a copy in the library. I do have my personal
absolutely.
copy, but I'll have
Thank
some
you
in the
so
library.
much. Thank you so much. So, in the context of the post-pandemic strategy, the fiscal strategies, we put forward this beautiful public financial management tool, which is gender budgeting, as one of the important policy strategies in the context of Asia Pacific. I'm speaking about Asia Pacific because, as Debu knows, my expertise is on in the context of Asia Pacific. So we have done a huge survey on gender budgeting, and it was done by IMF, and NIPFP was a part of that huge survey on gender budgeting. So it was done on the regional basis, and the data was built related to the gender outcomes and the fiscal policies. And that paper also, if you want to take a look, you can take a look. That is IMF working paper. It's available, I think, working paper number 150. So my book and my IMF working paper. So these are the two references, on the basis on which I'm giving you the talk. Now, we policymakers have a myopic idea that we look into only the economic growth as the outcome of a policy making. But gender budgeting is one step ahead. We need to move ahead from the concept of the economic growth to the economic growth plus paradigm. So then we have to think about the financing of human development. And when we think about the financing of human development, the thing which restricts us from doing that is a macro framework itself. In the sense, over the years, we have moved from the policymakers' discretionary space to a kind of rules based fiscal policy and monetary policy. And if you look into the RBI, I think students are aware that yesterday the Monetary Policy Committee meeting was there, and they decided that they will go for status quo related to the policy rates, and it's based on the inflation targeting that this NMF, the new monetary policy framework, revolves or rotates. So the moment I think about this rules-based economics, whether it is monetary policy or fiscal policy, then the question regarding gender, that's it's a $1 million question in the sense, on the monetary policy front, the moment I talk about the inflation targeting, you may ask a question: what is the flexibility of that rules-based framework in which we can integrate gender-related variables? What exactly is inflation targeting? You peg your policy rates based on a nominal inflation. That is, we perceive in our country, we can go officially up to 4% of inflation. Then we have a band, plus or minus, to up to 6% of inflation is comfortable. Then that deviation of that inflation anchor from the inflationary expectations. And that expectations variable is unobserved variable. So RBI floated expectation survey, but that is not a gender disaggregated expectation survey, it's a gender neutral inflation expectation survey. Then the other component of this inflation targeting is your output gap. Output gap is a difference between the potential GDP and the actual GDP. So in this rule-based monetary policy framework, where is gender coming in, or what are the entry points in which we can talk about the gender related human development concerns? Because one is your pegged inflation or the nominal inflation. Then other variable is the inflationary expectations, which is unobserved. And the third component is output gap. That is a difference between your potential output and actual output. And the moment you think about the potential output or the potential GDP, what we do in RBI and in North Block, we use filters, the econometric filters. You will learn about the filters in future. And using those filters, they take that particular series, then that series have fluctuations or the cyclical components and a trend component. So they take out the cyclical component and call that trend as potential. So that's a way the potential GDP or the potential output is calculated. And this controversial output gap, many economists have looked into that, including Geeta Gopinath, the economist of IMF. So in the context of emerging economies, the concept of the output gap, whether it is relevant or not, that's a question, because then we have to believe in the emerging economies that strict business cycles operate. But if there are no strict business cycles, then what's the relevance of output gap? So in the strict rules-based monetary framework, what is the scope of incorporating gender related variables or human development related variables? In the native economies, the potential output and the actual output, they calculate in terms of employment. Okay, in US it's employment, but in the context of India it is GDP. And the potential GDP, based on the systems of national accounts, we have a strategy, we have a methodology to calculate the GDP. But what is missing in that is the unmonetized, not valued, statistically invisible care economy. And that care economy, how will I define? It is the unmonetized, unpaid component of work or economic activity that's happening within the household and the society. So that care economic component is not the part of SNA, systems of national accounts, on the basis in which the GDP is calculated. And in 1993, for the first time ever, United Nations Statistical Division, they came up with a revolutionary stance that we need to do an extension of production boundary to incorporate these activities, which are very much a part of economic activity, but they are not into GDP because it is unmonetized and unpaid. And the contribution of men and women in that care economy is very relevant when we talk about gender budgeting. And this care economy statistics, how we will generate. In countries, we have a very new kind of surveys, primary surveys. That is the time use survey. Time use, in the sense, it's quite contrary to the other primary surveys. It's like you go and ask a person a question related to the chronology of the time. that how you spent your time 24 hours. So they give you that, the chronology of the time. Maybe I can ask Sanya, what is the chronology of time, the 24 hours? Then, researchers recode that chronology of the time in terms of SNA activity. What are the activities they do which are the part of GDP? Then extended SNA activity. That means after 1993, the SNA, the production boundary was extended. I mentioned that in order to incorporate the economic activities, though it is unmonetized. So those works form the part of extended SNA. Then in 24 hours, we do many things which are not economic activity in nature. Like, loving my kid. I cannot ask somebody else to love the kid for me. It's like a third party, criteria, that something we cannot ask somebody else to do it for us. And personal care, sleeping. So these activities are directed. We are not, trying to evaluate the finer sentiments or personal care or anything. But what we are trying to value is that extended SNA framework. In the sense, in 1993, the production boundary was extended to incorporate the unmonetized, unpaid sector, to capture that in the form of satellite accounts. Okay, now you can ask me a question, how to make it statistically visible. I have measured the activities in terms of time. So you can impute wages, or you can impute prices to it, or even you can use opportunity cost method to value that, a care economy. In the sense, pricing in the sense, if Sanya and me, we are going for fetching the fuel load or water, pricing in the sense, how much is our output? We try to value the price of that. For instance, if both of us come with 1 quintal fuel load, what is the market price of 1 quintal fuel load? That price we impute to that. But again, there is a limitation in this pricing methodology, in the sense that, Sanya may be walking 2 hours, I may be walking half an hour in the forest to get the fuel load. So intensity of the work effort is not captured. Another way is to impute the wages that is available in the market. So you impute the wage to the price, the work in terms of time, and the imputing wage to the time gives you a value. And third is opportunity cost time. What's the opportunity cost of, Sanya and me, if had we been not here? So the moment we think about an opportunity cost, maybe Sanya and me give you an outcome or output which is of same nature. But the moment you impute the opportunity cost, our opportunity costs are different. So that will give you a range of estimates. But if you use the wage or time, you get a particular estimate. So using this globalized substitute method, that means in the wage hierarchy in market, you take the minimum wage and impute that to the work done in the care economy sector and come up with a value. So you can forget all these technicalities, but the magnitude of the estimate, let me explain to you, that is coming up to half or the 50% of the GSDP in your country. So that means the sector is invisible, but it is statistically invisible. So if you try to estimate that sector, the magnitude of sector is quite huge. That's the importance of this valuation. Now, after doing all this valuation, if you tackle your potential output and tell RBI and not block that what you call as potential is not exactly the potential output, because a huge statistically invisible component over there, we need to value that and incorporate into that. Okay, that's a limitation of what we call as a potential output, or macroeconomists are very fond of that variable output gap, but that is not properly measured. So this is one constraint if you look into the monetary policy side. Now let me explain to you the fiscal policy front. Fiscal policy front in the sense how it is rules based. We have a fiscal rule, in the sense we have a fiscal responsibility of and budget management, and based on that, or even the Maastricht Treaty, based on that it was decided a country cannot have a fiscal deficit to GDP ratio above 3%. Now in the pandemic time, the FRBM or the fiscal rules are little flexible now. But otherwise, what we call as a fiscal rule is to look into your fiscal deficit to GDP, which is strictly 3%. And now we have a golden rule in the fiscal rules or the fiscal, FRBM. What is a golden rule? Revenue deficit needs to be zero. In the sense, revenue expenditure should be equal to revenue spending. In the sense, all what you earned through the revenue receipts, use that for your revenue spending, not more than that, not a pie more than that. So what we borrow, that will entirely go for the capital spending. So that's a golden rule. But of late, we try to, correct that, and we don't believe in golden rule now. The revenue deficit is phased out in the context of India. Now, what exactly is happening? If we have a golden rule, then the revenue spending, if your taxes are not buoyant, then you will curtail your revenue spending. And revenue spending, the compression of revenue spending is detrimental for human capital formation, because the main components of the revenue spending related to education, towards health, if the moment you put gender lens, that's very crucial here. So a gender aware human development related financing will suffer the moment you believe in this golden rules, if your revenues are not buoyant, and if you take the path to the fiscal consolidation through revenue expenditure compression. So that's the point I'm trying to articulate. But if the fiscal consolidation, that means arriving at 3% of GDP, is through tax buoyancy, then it's fine. But if it is through the capital compression or the expenditure compression, then that will affect the human development related components. So that's the point I would love to highlight. Now, when the macroeconomic framework is so strict, it's based on the rules-based economics, both on the monetary front and the fiscal front, as I articulated. And the moment you have a huge component of your economy getting statistically invisible, then what's the relevance of gender budgeting within this constrained space? That's what the countries across globe has tried to do. But we need to take this debate ahead, that how we can alter the discussions and debates by getting into the macroeconomic policy framework to incorporate the gender. So such debates on the fiscal policy front, people are very comfortable, in the sense North Bloc, they no longer ask to us what's the relevance of gender in North Bloc or in, fiscal policy, because we have articulated that, we need to, put forward a PFM framework, that is the public financial management. Yeah, so that's the problem, that we have a very strict macroeconomic framework. There, incorporating the gender components, those kind of debates needs to be, matured or needs to be taken to the next level. But what we are doing in terms of gender budgeting is operating within this constrained macroeconomic policy framework. Okay, so that's a limitation. Now, in the pandemic times, we had a lot of economic stimulus packages, and as a part of those fiscal stimulus packages, if you apply a gender lens, you can see that, a targeted cash transfer was announced for the women in the care economy. Then another program was, the energy infrastructure was given importance from a gender perspective, in the sense, the women in the low income households were given, fuel efficiency by the government. So that was a good program. Other than these two, predominantly economic stimulus packages were designed using the credit infusion narrative. But if you look into the credit infusion narrative in terms of cost of credit and access to the credit, it is not only the cost of credit that matters for women. Women love to have access to the formal credit, because, the moment you decrease the interest rate, you are only tackling the cost of the credit. but access of women to the credit in the formal sector, how that is happening. Because if women, if they don't have collateral, they don't have access to the formal banking sector or formal credit sector. So the collateral is very important over here. Otherwise, the model is peer monitoring. You form a self-help group, and through that peer monitoring model or the self-help group, you open a bank account and keep your money over there. So there has been a revolution in the terms of access to the credit by giving digital infrastructure in public finance, by opening bank accounts for all the people. But here the limitation is that we have bank accounts open, but we can see that that is zero balance bank accounts. So that is a good step, but still we have miles to go. So that's a problem with the credit infusion methodology. So when the economic stimulus packages are short run in nature, when the economic stimulus packages are rolled back, because we have gone ahead with the normalization procedure. Normalization in the sense we announce the rollback of all the economic stimulus packages announced, except for the food security measures. Then the relevance of gender budgeting, that we have to see. Because when the economic stimulus packages were rolled back, the strong PFM tools, the long term public financial management tools like gender budgeting, gained importance in the post pandemic strategy. Then what's the role of gender budgeting? How we can reboot gender budgeting in the post pandemic fiscal strategy? Because now we are working out the risk, in the sense uh, gender budgeting, or if you look into the other macro variables, fiscal marksmanship is crucial. Lot of programs finance minister can announce in the form of tackling gender inequalities, but that has to get translated into actual outcomes and outputs and outcomes. So that is fiscal marksmanship. Marksmanship is perfect only when the announcements and the actual spending match. In the sense, if you have a deviation between the budget estimates, that budget estimates is what finance minister announced in the budget, and the revised estimates after 1 year, when you revise it based on that fiscal forecasting models adjustments and all, then it has to be closer to the reality. So we have done a fiscal marksmanship analysis in an IPFP, and most of the things, the sources of, one moment, the sources of the errors of this poor marksmanship was random. Random in the sense the policymakers cannot have a call on those aspects. But if the fiscal forecasting errors are not random, if they are on the basis of the bias of the policymaker, then we have to improve the assumptions and improve the models to get it correct. And you can take a look, Sani and her friends can take a look into the gender budgeting statement which is put forward by the government of India. Of course, state governments also have gender budgeting statements. In the gender budgeting statements, you take a look into the budget estimates, BE, then RE, revised estimates and actuals. And if there is a deviation across different components of the gender budgeting, then you can say that whatever announced by the finance minister and the actual estimates or the actual spending, there is a deviation and we need to correct for that. And the deviation can happen if if there is no state's capacity, or the deviation can happen if the funds are underutilized. So there are many reasons for the deviations between what is announced and what is real. And in many countries, fiscal councils, those institutions takes into account, what is this fiscal marksmanship. And in our country, there is no fiscal council, but an IPFP does a bit of, this fiscal marksmanship and budget credibility analysis, in which we identify the deviations between what is budgeted and what is actual. So that we need to look into. Why I am emphasizing on fiscal marksmanship of gender budgeting? Because if you look into a major program announced within the gender budgeting framework related to safety and security of women was Nirbhaya funds. But what has happened to that funds? The announcement was 1,000 crores or something. But if you look into the budget over the years, we can see that the fiscal marksmanship is not perfect. It was just announced, but we have not been, it has been not been utilized in a proper sense. So that is very important. And you apply a gender lens to the existing budget, that is gender budgeting. That is exposed gender budgeting. Then you identify the gender needs, cost it, and incorporate into the budget policy. That is also gender budgeting. That is ex ante gender budgeting. So in many countries, ex ante gender budgeting was very popular. They have done this ex ante gender budgeting by identifying the gender needs and then cost it and incorporate that in the budget. And those experiments happened in Philippines, it happened in many states of India. So that is very crucial. But the top down gender budgeting is looking into the existing budget documents through a gender lens. Then we will be able to articulate that how much a country is spending for women if you apply that ex post gender budgeting. So you have to take a call that what gender budgeting your country requests. In the sense, gender budgeting is a fiscal innovation. And fiscal innovation or any other innovation, if you look into, it goes through many phases. In the sense, the first phase is the knowledge building or the model building, which is very specific to your country. So different countries have articulated different models of gender budgeting. Then the next phase of this fiscal innovation is institutional mechanism and the mechanism designs, which is important to translate this policy research into the real policy making of your country. So how to translate that? You need institutions. So what are the institutional mechanism which you need to build into to make this research translate into policy? Then third step of the innovation process is, of course, you have to build state capacity. You have to build a lot of capacity building mechanisms. So that's the third step. And the fourth step is any initiative or any public finance initiative needs accountability mechanisms. So what are the accountability mechanisms on board to look into the gender budgeting? So these are the four important components if you look into gender budgeting as a fiscal innovation exercise. So far, what I try to articulate is one, we have to move beyond economic growth paradigm. Second, the existing macroeconomics framework is very rigid. If you look into the monetary policy front or fiscal policy, and then they are trying to articulate what are the rules-based economics operating in the economy on the monetary policy and the fiscal policy front. And third, within this existing macroeconomic framework, we are floating gender budgeting as a public financial management tool. And this PFM tool is very important because, especially in the post COVID fiscal policy strategy, we need to reboot gender budgeting as a long term PFM tool for accountability and fiscal transparency. And the final point was, you are using this gender budgeting as a fiscal innovation, and what are the different phases of fiscal innovation and how to map these different phases of fiscal innovation in the context of India and other countries in Asia Pacific or in other parts of the world. So that's a way I was narrating this gender budgeting just as a story to you, because I know that you have just come with a lot of dreams and aspirations about economics, but it's a different kind of an economics the moment you try to incorporate a beautiful gender lens to it. Now, let me take you through some country examples. Australia, of course, they are the pioneers of gender budgeting. They have done it in 1984. They applied an exposed gender budgeting in the sense they apply a gender lens to the existing budget. But their advantage was that, gender budgeting, it was not a part of, what we call as women and child development and a sectoral initiative. It was a part of the highest policy making body or the cabinet, like PMO or the highest policy making body in our country. They don't have a status of women's office yet, but you try to visualize that When a country gives importance to these aspects of security and safety for women and other aspects related to the gender inequality as a prime significance of a country, what will happen? So that was importance given to the gender inequality aspects in Australia, and it was that status of women's office was at the top level, okay, of the cabinet. And this is the case in some Pacific islands also. In Timor Leste, it's at the topmost level, that the status of women's office operating in their country at the topmost level. But we have not yet got that space in our country, that the safety and security of women, that's a prime objective, that kind of a gender equality goal, that's not yet designed in the context of India. What's the relevance of designing a gender equality goal? So if we are focusing on four aspects, and these are the four aspects we need to arrive at when we talk about gender equality goals, then we can map it. What are the targets? What are the ways in which we need to attain there? And what are the budgetary backup or the fiscal backup to reach there? So in Canada, the framework of gender-based analysis and gender budgeting is gender equality goals framework. That's very easy, to track or to have a goal, then having targets, then building up your budget and reaching to that level. So linking the resources to results is quite easy over there. Now, what happens in Philippines? In Philippines, what they have done is they earmarked. Earmarking is not a good principle of gender budgeting, in the sense they earmark that 5% or 10% of the developmental budgets from all the sectors should be earmarked for gender development. So irrespective of the sector, the things were getting sidelined, and whatever they called as 10% was taken into consideration as an upper bound. So then it was getting marginalized. So many issues Philippines tackled, and over the years they converted that earmarking principle into a result oriented gender budgeting. So that was the correction they have done. Now Australia, I mentioned Philippines, then in Rwanda, that's one of the beautiful gender budgeting exercise in which in the PFM model they look into the financial allocations, then fiscal marksmanship, then how the resources are linked to the uh, results or the outcomes. So all the aspects of the PFM models were taken into consideration in the context of Rwanda. Now, you can ask me a question: gender budgeting is sustainable or not? What are the elements in which we can make gender budgeting sustainable? In the context of Korea, they made gender budgeting sustainable by making it a legal mandate. So it was legally mandated, in the sense, in the national financial law, several clauses related to the gender budgeting was incorporated. So it was mandatory for the country to look into this gender budgeting aspects in the PFM circle. It's a circle. I mentioned about different components of the PFM. Like that, if you ask me the question whether that is legally mandated in India, of course, gender budgeting has to start with the call circular. And the budgetary call circular is a mandatory thing, because if something is there in the call circular, which is the beginning of the process of budget budgeting in India, once you mandate it in a call circular or a budget circular, then the different sectors they have to do it when they form their demand for grants. So it's like budgeting process starts with the budget circular. In the budget circular, things are mandated. Then after that, the different sectors of the ministries, they come up with the demand for grants. Then there is a beautiful lens. They apply a gender lens in that process. Now, what are the entry points in this budgetary process to incorporate a gender lens? So one, I mentioned the budget call circular. Now, prior to the budget, we have a lot of deliberations that's happening in the economy, like various stakeholders come and talk to the finance minister about their aspirations, industrial groups, women's groups. We can articulate our aspirations so that finance minister takes a note. So that is another way in which the gender budgeting can be articulated or incorporated, or that entry point. Now, prior to the budget, we place a document in the parliament that is economic survey. You can have a chapter on gender budgeting or gender. That is another entry point. Now, when finance minister speaks in the budget speech, you can articulate what are the components of gender budgeting you're aspiring for your country. Then after the budget, parliament go recess, right? Then there are many standing committees which form in that period. Then after a point of time, parliament come back after recess. Then they have vote on account debate in the parliament. So in order to have an informed debate on gender budgeting during that vote on account time and all, during this recess, the institutions like NIPFP, we used to make an exposed gender budgeting, a small document. We used to prepare and provide it to the parliamentarians. So who are the stakeholders or the players of gender budgeting process? It's not academicians and the finance ministry alone. It's like civil society organizations, parliamentarians, researchers, academia. The stakeholders are heterogeneous. It's not like it's just confined to a think tank or a civil society or a ministry of finance. It is all the sectoral ministries, because the entire demand for grants you're analyzing through a gender lens. So that's the way this procedure is happening. So maybe you can take an exercise like you take the expenditure budget, it's uploaded in the web. So students can take a look into the expenditure budget. Then you can, now the climate financing is the fashion. Like we try to put a component of the climate change aspect into this different demand for grants and to arrive at this climate change. But the climate change group, they don't have any clue how we have articulated and incorporated or institutionalized gender budgeting. So now we are trying to learn from each other, okay, the climate group and the gender group. And there is a lot of synergy and a lot of overlap in this exercise. So this is a way in which the PFM tool is getting strengthened. We started with gender, then we are now looking into the child budgeting, we are looking into the climate budgeting, and I understand that in Meghalaya there is youth budgeting. So these are different PFM tools which are very relevant from the perspective of fiscal transparency and accountability. And now, among the country experiences, of course, Mexico, I need to talk to you because that is another country, one of the provinces of Mexico, that's Oaxaca. They incorporated gender lens on the taxation front because by mandate, by legal mandate, they asked the authorities, the tax authorities, to provide data gender disaggregated. So that's another way. And gender budgeting is not just confined to expenditure. We need to articulate gender budgeting on taxation side as well. There, an important entry point is tax transfers. What is tax transfer? We have to decide the devolution of the taxes collected or the divisible pool collected to the state government. So in that intergovernmental fiscal transfers, what is the scope of applying a gender lens? And in Ethiopia, they're articulating in the sense like, their upper house, like our Rajya Sabha, there are debates in Ethiopia to incorporate gender lens in the intergovernmental fiscal framework. And another country is, of course, India. But we incorporated gender aware variable into this intergovernmental fiscal transfer framework from the perspective of correcting the demographic transition. In the sense, there is a formula, a scientific formula. On that basis, this intergovernmental fiscal transfer is designed. And that formula is based on population, area. Uh, of course, the climate change is a part of that scientific formula. So net forest cover is incorporated. Then we have a distance criteria that is catching up. The poor states have to catch up with the rich states. So economic convergence is one of the crucial objectives of intergovernmental fiscal transfer. So we incorporated the distance variable in terms of the income. Then tax effort. In that, when Finance Commission started using the recent population figure instead of the population figure of 1971, the states which have corrected, the population, they express their concern that we are not going to get money if they are using the recent population because we have controlled the population. So we need to correct for that. And Finance Commission had used that demographic transition variable, the TFR, as a part of that. And of course, if you ask me whether that is gender aware, of course it's gender aware, but in directly, if you ask me whether there is a gender related variable in the intergovernmental fiscal transfers or in the tax transfers, we have not yet done that. In the sense, you can imagine, whether policymakers in the 16th Finance Commission, whether they are willing to incorporate human development index into the tax devolution formula or a gender development index into the tax devolution formula. There, the problem is the index is based on a complex procedure. It's a composite index. So we have to make the indices simple and transparent and practical so that the policymakers can relate to it. So what could be that human development variable we need to incorporate into the tax devolution formula, whether it has to be a composite formula or whether it has to be a simple indicator, so that we can deliberate. Those kind of deliberations will definitely happen with the 16th Finance Commission. That's my hunch. So in that, then weightage is a question. How much weightage you are going to provide for your gender variable or the human development variable is the next question. So these kind of debates, it's already existing in our country, but it will get strengthened with the 16th Finance Commission. That's my hunch. And what exactly is human development index? It's based on three parameters or three crucial dimensions of human development. One is education, the second variable is health, the third is income. And education is proxied by the mean years of schooling. It's a kind of a completion rate. We used enrollment rate and literacy rate prior, but now we are using the mean years of schooling. And students can take a look into how this is constructed in the NBER working paper by Barrow and Lee. So based on that methodology, we have incorporated that into the human development. Then health. Health is proxied by life expectancy. And the moment you talk about the life expectancy, it's the biological advantage, that if you look into the, gender, men and women, the life expectancy of women is relatively higher than men. It's a biological advantage. But this biological advantage is also getting neutralized by gender discrimination. And that gender discrimination starts even before birth in the context of India. And that's the importance of looking into this aspect, and especially the 16th Finance Commission, if they agree to this point that if the discrimination against women starts even before birth, we policymakers need to look into this aspect. It cannot be like, it cannot be an outlier for the way we work. It has to be the part of the highest policy making body. If that kind of an importance and seriousness is given to this aspect, I think the 16th Finance Commission is going to incorporate gender as a TOR. So this is my hunch. So keeping my fingers crossed. So if they are doing that, then methodology is the next question. The selection of variable is the next question. So in the selection of variables, whether they use the composite index or simple indicators, that's one important question. Then the methodology, whether they use a simple arithmetic mean or whether they get into geometric mean or whether they use harmonic mean. Harmonic mean in the sense we can even provide weights. Using weights, we can do the construction of the index. Okay. So this is the methodological challenge. So let's wait and see if the 16th Finance Commission is going to take it up. So from the policy front, the status of women's office needs to be at the highest policy making body. Intergovernmental fiscal transfers mechanism, the Finance Commission needs to take it up seriously. And third, Duflo's experiment at the lowest tier of the government, Duflo, that Nobel winning, about the randomized control trials, right? So they did an experiment in the context of India, where the feminization of governance that led to the changes or that alter the expenditure decisions. And their experiment, that proved in affirmative, like in the context of Rajasthan and West Bengal, they have done this randomized control trial. And the conclusion was that if the feminization of governance, if the pradhan is a female, then the females, the revealed preferences of women, they were incorporated into the expenditure decision. So that's a the bottom up process, what I meant by the ex ante gender budgeting. So its governance is very crucial. Feminization of governance is very crucial to take up the gender budgeting exercise. So these are the different challenges in terms of looking into the classification of budgetary transactions, looking into the macroeconomic framework existing in our country, and also the policy making space, whether there is a feminization of that policy making space, whether the voices of women are there, recorded or articulated. So that's yet another challenge. So these are quick thoughts that came to my mind. Now the floor is open. Sanya and her friends can ask me questions. I will listen to your concerns, and then I will talk to you about your concerns, and that's it. Over to you.
Thanks,
Ask me
thanks,
questions.
thanks,
Thanks.
thanks,
Thank you so
Professor
much.
Lekha. I mean, the floor is open to all, so please clarify your doubts, ask the questions, and it's all yours now. And of course, we'll take a joint photograph at the end of the discussion. So please switch on your camera at that point in time. And that's a request to all of you. It's a historic moment for all of us, so let's not miss it. Oh, the floor is open for questions.
Hi, my name's Rahul. I had a question. So I looked at this gender statement budget report online, and it seemed to be divided into like a part A and a part B. So I didn't understand what the point of this like segmentation was. Could you kind of explain what this achieves?
Sure, Rahul. Rahul, right?
Yeah.
Quickly, because we have to give time for your friends too. Quickly, the part A is a specifically targeted programs for women. Like when you comb the budget, all the demand for grants, maybe 52 or 53 demand for grants. If you look into that through a gender lens and identify the programs which are specifically targeted for women, then we collate that into part A. And we cannot say that gender budgeting is only part A or specifically targeted programs for women. Because the moment I ask you a question, Rahul, how much India is spending for women? And you say that, ma'am, I looked into specifically targeted programs and I came to the conclusion that it is only 1% of the entire budget, then people will get that's a shocker. So we need to apply a gender lens to the 99% of budget as well. So we try to articulate that there are many mainstream spending in which there is an intrinsic gender component, and we use different methodologies to identify those components. And methodologies can differ. It can be public expenditure benefit incidence analysis, that is unit cost and unit utilized you construct and you arrive at a benefit incidence, then you use the beneficiaries data. There are different methods in which you can apply to the 99% of the budget to arrive at the gender specific components, and that you put it as part B. So part B is not entirely that specifically targeted programs for women, but there are many employment programs, poverty programs, credit programs. There are many mainstream programs in which there is an intrinsic gender component which we need to track and report across sectors. So that's what is happening in the part B. Okay, Rahul?
Yes, I got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yeah, Mukta.
Yes, ma'am. So I want to know about, does this gender budgeting programs target gender wage gaps?
Yeah, sure. Gender wage gap is very crucial to address. But, in the context of developed countries, the capability deprivation is not the question they look into, because in education and health, capability deprivation is an important concern for the emerging economies and developing economies. But in the developed countries, the gender budgeting, the questions related to gender budgeting is related to what you have asked, the gender wage disparities. But again, the gap in the context of COVID, the gap was little narrowed down, in the sense There was a downward harmonization of men's wages. But that's not exactly what we talk about, narrowing the wage gap when we talk about gender budgeting, but to give equal wages to the same skills or the same work done by men and women. So those articulations are very important when we talk about gender budgeting. I agree with you. Yeah. Thanks, Mukta.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yes, Professor, I also had a question.
Yeah, who is that soft voice?
Sanya, hi.
Sanya, hi.
I wanted to ask that you talked about the randomized control trial that was conducted looking at the importance of representation of women in local government bodies. That also brings in the idea of ground up approach, considering the vast needs and diversity of a country like India. So how important do you think that is, and how can the ideas of gender budgeting be integrated on ground? And also how can we tackle challenges or biases that might exist on the local level? So are there any monitoring or evaluation mechanisms that would improve the effectiveness?
Can we take the other question also? Sneha, can I take one more question?
One more question, Sanya, wait for me. I'll hear Sneha also. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Thanks.
I'm Sneha. So thank you for the talk, Professor. My question was more of your opinion on this, and I'm stating to the fact of already not existing women who are not there in the employment field, right? So suppose we're creating new employment for them, or suppose we're also trying to budget for new more enrollment for women, for children. So in this case, how important do you think is the acceptance rate? Because we also have interstate or demographic differences such as religion and other, such categories that hamper with the acceptance rate. And I'm not trying to state that we as women do not or not ready to accept such, increases or chances for our approval. But I'm just sort of trying to understand how do you think that the acceptance rate of all these policies is?
Deepu, now questions are getting tough. Very brilliant students, 4 questions.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Let me take up, Sneha, thank you. But let me take up Sanya's question on randomized control trial. Of course, wonderful. What exactly is randomized control trial? One experiment, let me tell you, regarding immunization. That Dufflo and her team has done that in our country. Immunization is free. But if you look at the immunization statistics, it's not 100%. Like all women didn't come with their kids to have their, children immunized. So they had a randomized control experiment in which they control certain immunization camps by providing lentils. Then, women responded to that. The camps where lentils were provided, women came and, immunization was 100% in those controlled, camps. But let me ask you a question. Can it be a gender budgeting thing? Because giving incentives, incentivizing a woman to access lentil and getting her child immunized, it's not gender budgeting because, in the sense, it can be a short run gender budgeting. A short run in the sense, that agency in the women is not activated. The moment you tell that you're incentivizing a woman to come to, immunization camp to access a completely free public good, okay? So that is not gender budgeting, but gender budgeting relates to, giving agency to women so that, she has to feel the part of that development process. So that's the, my quarrel with the randomized control experiments that have, been conducted by the group, the Nobel laureate or the Nobel winning group. And I understand that, there are many, critic or criticisms that has happened related to the RCT. And in Kerala, they couldn't even, do that, controlled experiments because, policymakers mentioned that we are into the second generation reforms and something happened. They couldn't do that experiments ethically in the context of Kerala and in many states if you look into. So those are the limitations of controlled randomized control trials. Now your question what is the relevance of gender budgeting and how we have to do it at the local level. Of course, there was a big cross-country study, and Debu was there in an IPFP at that time. We have looked into Morocco, Mexico, Philippines, South Africa, all these countries. We try to understand the question you have asked: fiscal decentralization and the role of decentralized fiscal space and gender budgeting. So there, there is a principle of subsidiarity. What is principle of subsidiarity? That the decisions needs to be taken at the level which is closest to the people. If it is top down, then the outcomes are not perfect. So using the principle of subsidiarity, the gender budgeting needs to be built up. Then, the most of the experiments that has happened at the local level, they are using the ex ante gender budgeting. So if you look into the Philippines, some of the communes we have studied in Sorsogon and Hilongs, two communes, there, they try to build in the local level gender budgeting. One source commune, Sorsogon, they have incorporated the health. Another, agriculture was incorporated. So it was highly sectoral initiatives, but they try to incorporate the local level mechanisms in which the gender concerns can be incorporated. For instance, I mentioned about this agriculture. The question they have asked is absence of mother in the house. That was creating some sort of tensions in Sorsogon communes. Because in Philippines, you can understand from the data that mothers, women go out to urban spaces or other countries as, nannies. They call them as nannies. But absence of mother in the house was creating problems. So they try to revamp agriculture so that their women will stay in the village, and how to prevent the migration of women from the village. So their gender budgeting exercise was completely from that perspective. Now, what happened in Hilongs? And there, the women counselor was a doctor. Her, articulation was that maternal mortality rate in my commune needs to be reduced to zero. So, what are the different mechanisms I need to adopt, within the gender budgeting framework? And you can understand that maternal mortality rate, to reduce that, you don't need a medical revolution or anything, right? Technological revolution. It's like the proper personals needs to be placed at the local government or the local space in which the institutionalization of delivery has to happen. Somebody has to attend the woman. Then we can prevent the deaths, because most of the deaths happen through hemorrhage after the delivery of the child. So how can we prevent that? So these experiments were looked into, and they identified there are three delays to the process. First delay: women, especially the pregnant women, they have to feel that they are not feeling well. That the delay that happens, the moment they articulate it to their relative, then things will move. But that articulation, that took some time. That, then the awareness needs to be built in, and the prenatal, whatever information and the awareness needs to be given to the women, that needs to be given to the women in the village. That's the first delay. Second delay is, of course, infrastructure delay. Like, she has to be taken to the hospital. So if you have good roads, if you have good infrastructure, then things will move fast. Then the third delay, in the health sector, in the health units, do you have proper personals there, or absenteeism of persons over there will create some kind of a delay. So there are different methods in which you have to apply a gender budgeting lens, so that the maternal mortality can be zero. So she worked, this woman counselor, she worked in collaboration with all the local level functionaries to make it to zero, and they have won the game. And she proudly told me, and Dr. Govindarao was there with me in that field visits, and they told us that we tried different experiments and in gender budgeting to make the maternal mortality zero. So those are the different experiments that happened at the local level. And now Sneha's question of the acceptance, recently the print, they asked me, Nikhil from print. Nikhil studied in Gokhale, in Pune. Nikhil is a very, he's a budding journalist. His articles are very good. You must take a look into the way Nikhil Rampal writes. He's in print, and he was looking into the estimates, neat estimates, not educated not employed, that statistics of men and women, and it was huge in the context of India, and it was closely correlated with the care economy burden. And also, we took, I mean, of course, you also can take a look into that paper by, again, the Nobel winning group, that Duflo, Abhijit Banerjee. They have written a paper. The title of that paper, it is there in the MIT Action Lab. It's an MIT paper, Marry for What? Mate selection process in India. So there, the inference, of course, you can connect to it that the economic future of women. What is the economic future of women? So when you look into those aspects in several income categories, marriage is considered as the economic future of women. It's not that financially independent women, educated women, employed women. That is not the case. Marriage is considered as the economic future of women. So unless those kind of social norms or perceptions change, unless the care economy burden changes, then we will not get the women on board. And as Sneha asked, how to tackle this female labor force participation or female economic activity rate, how can we strengthen that? And how can we make it the fastest and smartest way to develop? And the crucial question is, you need to look into the perception bias one. Second is the care economy burden. So you may have employer of last resort policies in your country, like job guarantee. But if you look into the access statistics, gender differentials are very much evident. So why that is happening? Complementary fiscal policies in terms of care economy infrastructure is very crucial to have women on board on the, to do the guaranteed jobs, or to do the, job, or the employment statistics needs to go up. So, the war has started, but, miles to go to get it. As Sneha, there's a feminization view. If you look into the literature related to female economic participation rate, there's a feminization view. Like the female economic participation rate initially declines with the economic development, but after that it will pick up. So that feminization view aspect, one needs to look into from empirical perspectives. It's theoretical, and you need to take a look into that those aspects empirically. Maybe panel data across states over time. What determines female economic activity rate? What are the different elements incorporating your economic growth? Because we need to look into the relationship between the growth or the economic development and female economic force participation rate, controlling for various other macro variables. Okay. And thanks, Sneha and um, Sanya. Sanya, right? Sanya. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Sanya.
So I think we're already running, it's already 4. So let's stop at this moment. And thanks to Professor Lekha for the wonderful talk.